And we are going to be talking about President Bill Clinton and the 1990s. Now, again, we're for the era in history that I am very familiar with because I grew up during this era and definitely remember President Bill Clinton. So, talked about the election of 1992 and Bill Clinton being elected in 1992, despite only getting 42% of the vote, I think is what we said there. And let's see how he would govern as president. Again, this would be our first Democratic president and since Jimmy Carter. So, first 2 years of Bill Clinton's presidency, you're going to see one of the things that he tasked his wife to do, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Again, you're probably all familiar with her today. She would have had a task force to propose a plan for universal health care coverage. Now, you're going to see this plan is going to run into a lot of opposition from Republicans, small business organizations, and the insurance industry. It would fail to pass, but again, you will see yet another attempt here to try to figure out something with the nation's healthcare. Again, we had been talked about this. This is something that presidents had really been looking at since Harry Truman was the first one to look at how to change the healthcare industry within the United States. Now, what are going to be some legislative accomplishments that Bill Clinton is going to make in these first 2 years? One, you're going to get the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, you'll hear, which allows employees, basically they can miss a certain amount of time under FMLA. Let's say you have a medical issue and you have to be out of work for a certain period of time, maybe a month, that this would protect your job in that situation. Two, motor voter law, which enabled voter registration when receiving a driver's license. You'd have the Brady handgun bill, which would institute a 5-day waiting period for the purchase of handguns. And since that's passed, that has been actually eliminated, but that was passed. You'd also have the 94 anti-crime bill, which if you kept up with the election at all here in 2020, you will hear that was something that got brought up during the debates several times because Joe Biden was one that helped co-sponsor this bill. And this would provide $30 million in funding for police protection and crime prevention. It also banned the sale of certain rifles. But this, again, that was a bipartisan effort as well. That wasn't just on Joe Biden. That was a bipartisan effort to pass that anti-crime bill. You would also have NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was a free trade deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, which, again, if you've been keeping up with politics over the past couple of years, you've heard that talked about quite frequently. You're also going to see during this time that the budget deficit would decrease through spending cuts and tax increases. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that and about what that looks like. So those are the first 2 years. And I told you all in the last lesson that America really likes divided government, and we're going to see that comes true again in 1994. After the election of 1992, the Democrats controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate. So in 1994 midterm elections, which midterm elections generally don't go the way of the president that is in power during that time, you're going to have the Republicans, and they create what they call their contract with America, basically saying this is what they want the government to look like, and these are the changes that would need to happen. With this election in 1994, you're going to see the Republicans would gain control of both houses of Congress for the first time since 1954. So again, this is going to bring us back to divided government. You're going to have the president a Democrat and the House and the Senate being Republican. The Democratic Congress had gotten very unpopular, a lot due to the taxes increases they put in place, as well as the gun control measures that I had mentioned earlier. Now, President Clinton, he would adjust his policies based on having a Republican Congress now, and he would actually say in a speech, the era of big government is over. And again, we have seen since World War II, actually since the Great Depression, the Democrats had really resembled, and big government was kind of a hallmark, the big government New Deal policies. Now, the new Speaker of the House during this time would be Newt Gingrich, and he would lead the efforts for what was known as this contract with America to reduce both federal programs and spending. And you're going to see that he is actually going to get agreement from President Bill Clinton of working together on balancing the budget. Now, there would be a couple government shutdowns during this period as a result of disagreements on the budget, but you're going to see that President Clinton and the leaders of Congress are going to be willing to work together to try to accomplish for both sides to accomplish some of their goals. Now, in 1993, you're going to have the largest terrorist attack, domestic terrorist attack in U.S. history in Oklahoma City. Again, I definitely remember this as a kid. I was, I guess, 9 years old when this happened. But on April 19th, 1993, you'd have an anti-government extremist, Timothy McVeigh. He would bomb the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. You can see the result of the bombing there. Basically, he filled what was essentially like a U-Haul truck, filled that with fertilizer and explosives, and blew the entire front of the building off there. And again, the reason that he did this, he said he did this as payback for like Waco and some other things that had happened, situations that happened with the government during this time. You're going to have 168 people killed, including 19 children. Again, the building had a daycare in it for the employees of the building, and that's why you're going to have so many children killed in this. And again, this was the worst act of domestic terrorism to that point in history, and it is still today the worst homegrown terrorist attack in U.S. history. McVeigh, he would be found guilty of 171 different offenses and would be executed in 2001. So again, keep that in mind, this idea of terrorism and terrorist attacks. I even remember as a kid, I lived in Farmville after this, and we had a small federal building there, and just remember driving past that and being worried about, like, could somebody bomb that too? Like, what could happen with that? All right. I mentioned earlier a balanced budget being an important thing that that both Bill Clinton and the Republicans in Congress would agree on. And in 1996, you're going to see that Congress and President would compromise on the budget. That one left Medicare and Social Security benefits intact, so didn't touch those. Second, some welfare reform. It limited welfare benefits to 5 years under the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act. And one of the big things with that was what they were trying to do is create a way that people didn't get stuck on welfare, and that people incentivize people to get jobs and not depend on welfare as a long-term, more of a short-term help versus a long-time plan to be on. It set some limits on immigration, increased the minimum wages, and balanced the budget. And you're going to see by 1998, the budget deficit would be eliminated, and it would produce the first federal surplus since 1969. So one, again, with that helping balance the budget, so you're not building up these huge deficits, but also another thing to keep in mind, the economy was doing really, really well during this time, which would help with that as well. Now, as far as today goes, we aren't anywhere close to balancing our U.S. budget anymore. Basically, after Clinton's administration and then the start of the war in Afghanistan, that's pretty much been a pipe dream ever since then. Now, that leads us to the election of 1996. You're going to have Senator Bob Dole versus Bill Clinton. Bob Dole, older man who had been a senator for quite a long time. Again, not somebody that when you can kind of compare him to Bill Clinton had more youthful energy to him than Bob Dole did during that time. Also, you have a really good economy during this time and the balanced budget that had happened. So you're going to actually see Bill Clinton would win this. He'd be the first Democrat since FDR to be reelected president. And Republicans would, of course, keep the control of both houses of Congress during this time. You can see there on the map, Ross Perot did run again, but he did not get as big of a portion of the vote. And it's not really considered that he helped sway this election either way in 1996. So the technology boom, and this is going to be called the dot-com era. During the 1990s, you're going to have technological innovations that really exploded during this time, from PCs, software, internet, cable, wireless communications. A lot of things are going to explode during this time. You're going to have a lot of high-tech companies such as Apple, Intel, and Microsoft, joined by these other dot-com companies like AOL, Amazon, Yahoo, and Google. All of these companies, again, are innovating during this time and are getting very, very wealthy during this time as well. America Online, I remember that was the first way that we were able to get online at my house that we lived in after we got our first personal computer in our house during this time. You'd also see the dot-com boom and an increase in home ownership during this time led prosperity throughout the nation. By the year 2000, unemployment was down to 3.9%, and average and low-income Americans would see their first growth in their income, first real growth since 1973. So again, there's going to be a lot of prosperity during this era, and a lot of this fueled by the dot-com boom, as well as you're going to have a housing boom in the country as well. Now, Bill Clinton's administration, again, not without scandal, and probably the thing that a lot of people know best from his, or remember best from Bill Clinton's presidency, of course, is going to be his impeachment. From the very early days of Bill Clinton's presidency, him and his wife had been under investigation due to some business dealings they had in Arkansas, which was known as the Whitewater controversy, some firings of White House staff, political use of FBI files, and sexual harassment claims against Clinton during his time as governor. And you'll kind of see how Ronald Reagan was able to be Teflon Ron. In a lot of ways, Bill Clinton was able to, these scandals didn't hurt him in a big way as president. He was still very, very popular, and a lot of people kind of just disregarded these scandals in general. Now, Hillary Clinton, she would charge that this was part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. So, as there was an investigation, there was an independent prosecutor, Ken Starr, who had been hired during this time by Congress basically to investigate the business dealings of Bill Clinton, specifically in relation to this Whitewater controversy, which was a real estate deal in Arkansas. During that time, Ken Starr is going to find that Clinton had lied under deposition about his relationship with a White House intern, Monica Lewinsky. Bill Clinton had claimed that there was no sexual relationship between him and Miss Lewinsky, but then he would later go on to admit that there was an inappropriate relationship between him and this intern. Now, the issue is going to be this deposition. He is under oath. So if he lied about the relationship with Miss Lewinsky, then that means that he was lying under oath. You're going to see two videos here. One where he goes on and says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And the second is actually going to be his apology to the American people with this. And again, this was all playing out on TV for everybody. I remember when a bulk of this was going on. I think I was in 8th or 9th grade. And I remember being very aware of what was going on because it was in the news all of the time. So December 1998, the House would vote to impeach President Clinton on 2 counts of perjury and obstruction of justice. Now, both parties basically condemned what Bill Clinton did and said, look, him having this relationship with the White House intern was improper and it should not have happened. But you're going to see overall, his popularity was still very, very high with the American people. And you saw very different opinions. Some people said, hey, it's his personal life. We shouldn't be worried about that and what's going on in his personal life. Other people said, hey, if he's lying about this under oath, then what else is he lying about with that? So Bill Clinton would be only our second president to be impeached, the first being Andrew Johnson in 1868. But much like Andrew Johnson in 1868, once Clinton's impeachment goes before the Senate, he would be found not guilty on all charges by the Senate, and that scandal would then be put behind him. Again, still, he is going to emerge from this a very, very popular president. Still, like I said, a lot of people saw it as, hey, it's his personal life, and really Congress shouldn't be digging into his personal life. Yeah, he might be a crummy guy for what he did, but again, it's not the American people's business. Now, shifting to Clinton's foreign policy, you're going to see he would pick Madeleine Albright to be his Secretary of State. She would become the first female Secretary of State, and she was very assertive in the use of American power. But still, you had a lot of questions about what is the role of the U.S. in a post-Cold War world. U.S. troops you'd have some U.S. troops die in peacekeeping missions both in Somalia and in Haiti, but you're going to see in other places such as Northern Ireland that we would step in and help negotiate an end to British rule in Northern Ireland and the armed conflict that was happening there. During this time, you'd also have the creation of the European Union, which would adopt a single currency, the euro, again, the European Union, a way for the countries of Europe to work together. Russia during this time was still struggling economically. In 2000, they would elect Vladimir Putin as their new president. Again, his name is probably familiar with you. You still hear a lot about Vladimir Putin today. You would also see economic sanctions during this time against South Africa lifted when they ended their policy of apartheid that they had, which was basically legalized segregation that they had in that country. They would get rid of that, and we would end the sanctions that we had on them. Now, foreign policy concerns. Serbia. Serbia is going to be a big issue. You can see that Serbia here is on the top map there. And basically the reason this area of the world was such an issue is that you have a lot of different ethnic groups that live there, and a lot of different ethnic minority groups that live there, and all of them are kind of fighting for power in that region. The dictator that was in place over Serbia, he would carry out a series of armed conflicts within the country to try to suppress a lot of these ethnic and religious groups that you had within the country. And you would have thousands of people killed there in what was known as an ethnic cleansing, again, trying to get rid of these groups. We would step in both Bosnia and in Kosovo, which are regions within Serbia there, to help stop the bloodshed. When we stepped in, really, mostly we just did air attacks is what we did versus sending troops in on the ground. If you look at a map today of that part of the world, you'll see it's broken up into a lot of small different countries. As far as Asia, nuclear proliferation became a concern in North Korea, as it is today, India and Pakistan. You would see in 1995 that we would restore diplomatic relations with Vietnam, which we had not had since the Vietnam War. In the Middle East, you're going to see Saddam Hussein would continue to be a problem there. He would defy U.S. weapons inspectors. That would lead Clinton to launch airstrikes against Iraq. Again, that wouldn't be a full-scale war or anything like that. You'll see mostly during Clinton's presidency, he preferred to use airstrikes versus sending in ground troops. Also in the Middle East, you will see that Israel would sign a peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. Again, very, very important. Anything that you can do in the Middle East to help promote peace would be good. Now, globalization. This is going to become another hallmark of the world during this time. You have an increase in trade and communications, as well as the movement of goods and capital all around the world. And you're seeing a more global, interconnected world during this time. The World Trade Organization would be created in 1994 to kind of oversee trade agreements. The IMF would be created, and the World Banks to make loans and supervise economic policies with poorer nations. You'd also have the G8, which is the group of 8, which is the 8 largest industrial economies in the world. They would remain leading economic powers during this time, but you would see the big growth of China, India, and Brazil as economic powers during this time. Of course, you still see that really, really big with China and India today. The big thing to note from this, again, is that the world is growing a lot more interconnected, and the countries were growing more interconnected during this time. And with this, you're going to see something that happens in one part of the world could economically have huge waves on other parts of the world. Kind of like, think about it today. Like, if something sparks, let's say maybe in a war in Iran, that's going to lead to an increase in gas prices throughout the world because of the dependence of the world on oil from the Middle East. So just remember that. Now, you would have several terrorist attacks that would happen, and a lot of Americans are going to become familiar during this time with a guy named Osama bin Laden and the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. In February of 1993, the World Trade Center would be bombed. They would actually fill a truck with explosives, drive it into the basement of one of the World Trade Center buildings there. Their hope was to explode it and that the whole building would collapse. That did not happen. It did cause a lot of damage and killed 6 people and injured 1,500, but the building did not collapse. The one good thing to come out of that is there was a reevaluation within the World Trade Center. The group, the security that ran it, and they did improve a lot of how people got out of the building in the case of a fire. And you're going to see that on September 11, 2001, that's going to be a reason a lot of people are able to get out of the building very, very quickly. Is because of some of the improvements that were made after that first World Trade Center attack. In August 1998, you're going to see U.S. embassies around the world will be attacked by Al-Qaeda explosives. And then October 12, 2000, the USS Cole, a Navy ship, would be attacked by suicide bombers in Yemen. 17 U.S. sailors would be killed, 37 injured, and Al-Qaeda would claim responsibility for those attacks. You can see the picture there at the bottom of the hole that was blown in there. Basically what they did is loaded a little boat with explosives, brought it up alongside the Navy vessel there, and then exploded it. Of course, Al-Qaeda was led by Osama bin Laden, somebody that was very, very familiar to the United States, and that's why he's going to hit the most wanted list by the FBI after these attacks. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, what was a society like in the 1990s? You're going to see the U.S. was becoming more ethnically diverse, but also you're going to see a graying of the population because of an increase in life expectancy. Now, this graying is going to lead to more concerns in areas such as healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, and in Social Security. Social Security will be a big one, and that's still an issue today because people are living so much longer. The question is the system of Social Security sustainable, where the people working now are paying for the Social Security benefits of people that are receiving them now? And what you're having such a graying of the population that there isn't enough money coming into Social Security to cover those people. You would see during this time the decline of the traditional family and a growing number of single-parent families becoming a concern within the country. By 12.9 million families headed by a female with no husband in 2000, including 47% of Black families. The reason this is concern is because there is a correlation between a single-parent home and poverty, and this is why this got the government's attention. Also, you're going to see during this time, like I said, a housing boom, and home ownership during this time is going to grow to 67% of the population. And I mentioned earlier that per capita income would increase as well. So the economy, again, was doing very, very well. Now, I mentioned last class, we talk about some different areas here within this class. One of them we're going to talk quickly about is technology. Now, you kind of have to go back to the space race in the 1960s because a lot of things that were created during the space race are going to be things that get funneled in to the general economy in the U.S. Into stores and that people can buy. So we talked about before in the 60s, JFK pledged increased support for the American space program. In 1962, you'll have John Glenn be the first American to orbit the Earth. 1969, Neil Armstrong would be the first human to step on the moon. And then in 1983, you'd have Sally Ride be the first American woman to enter space. See there's a video there talking about the space race itself and remembering that. Now, after the space race, again, you're going to see after we landed on the moon, again, we do that several more times and kind of lose interest in going to the moon. But still, technology is going to be advancing at a very, very quick rate. You'd have the Voyager missions of the 70s, the space shuttle missions, 1981 to 2011. Again, that's what I remember as a kid. The space shuttle, which is the picture in the far right there. 1990, you'd have the Hubble telescope set up, which still gets us a lot of images in deep, deep space. And then 97, you'd have the Mars rover, where we'd actually put something on Mars to learn more about Mars. Now, this is very interesting. If you look at this Radio Shack ad from 1991, I always show this to my students and say, if you look at this ad, today there is basically one invention that can do most of what is on this Radio Shack ad. And that one thing is your cell phone can do a lot of these things. It's also amazing for me to look back on this and see how many of these things that we actually had in my house as a kid and how expensive that stuff was back then as well. So how has technology changed us as a country? We now have better access to communication and information. Now, if you want to know something, you just Google it. You can Google it and you can find it. Also, communication as well. I remember when I was a little kid writing letters to my grandma and sending them in the mail. I would have probably still had to do that if she was alive today because she didn't use a computer. Now, we can communicate very easily. For me, it started as a kid getting on America Online and using AOL Instant Messenger. But now you can text and use all kinds of messaging programs and Snapchat and all kinds of other stuff under the sun. Also, we are more of a global world now. Like we know a lot more about what's happening around the world, and we also know a lot of different viewpoints from around the world as well. It's also affected businesses. Again, businesses have had to change how they operate, again, going more online and having an online presence, as well as in urban and rural areas. I remember when I was a kid, kind of lived out in the middle of nowhere, we were not able to get cable to our house. And I remember then when satellite dishes, kind of like DirecTV, although back then you didn't have DirecTV, when that came around, and we were now able to hook up and use a satellite dish to get TV and be able to get news outside of local news and that kind of thing. So again, things have changed quite a bit. Communications, we kind of just talked a little bit about that there. Of course, you've got TV, the personal computer, which personal computer has really been supplemented or supplanted by cell phones and smartphones, which is a lot of people, might not even own a computer today and just have a cell phone. Email, as well as social media. I showed you the advancement there in pictures of cell phones, showing I did have a couple of those that are on that list right there, and how quickly cell phones themselves have advanced. And again, you see the iPhone came out in 2007, and that was really a big thing that really changed the look of phones and how we used phones during that time. Also, I've thrown in here the original iPod commercial. I doubt any of you actually have an iPod anymore, but look at this original commercial. It's about 30 seconds. About just look at the size of the iPod. Also, the original iPod, you did have to own a Mac to be able to put music on that. So what are some positives of the technology growth within this country? One, you got robotics, which do a lot. During the summer, I met a guy who works at the hospital here in town, and that's his job, is basically to control the robots. And he was just telling me about all the different surgeries now that they basically do by robots, that you have humans there to oversee it, but really the robot can do a lot of that. You also have improvement of medical care, starting back in the 60s with these breakthroughs in the medical field, the development of the polio vaccine by Jonas Salk. Again, we talked about how polio for like FDR left him paralyzed. Now, people could be vaccinated for that. And even within my lifetime, when I was a kid, I got chickenpox. Now, all of you have probably had the vaccine for chickenpox, so you don't ever have to worry about getting that. As well as like cancer screenings. You're going to see that with that as well. MRIs and that kind of thing as well. Medical imaging has improved quite a bit too. Computer industry, obviously advances from new technology. GPS, again, that used to be something very rare. Now that's something all of us have on our phones. Telecommunications, of course, with smartphones, and internet-based businesses. Again, now you don't have to have a physical presence as a store. You can be online only, kind of like Amazon. Even though Amazon is starting to branch out and do some physical locations, that's how Amazon got their start, completely as an online bookseller. And of course, now they've branched out to a lot of different things. So other impacts on American life, of course, increased domestic international travel for business and pleasure. That has gone down in price and made it much easier to do that. We have greater access to the news and other information now. Cheaper and more convenient means of communication. Again, now for us to communicate between each other, it really doesn't cost an arm and a leg like it used to. And of course, the convenience of online shopping through places like Amazon. Some more impacts here: hacking and personal identity theft, social media, telecommuting. So telecommuting, which during the pandemic that we are in right now, telecommuting has become a really big thing. Also, online coursework. You're taking this class pretty much all online, and that is the reason we are able to do that is because of technology. The growth of service industries. Again, you're going to see a lot more people working in service-specific industries because so many jobs have been moved where they can simply be done. You don't really need a human being to do that. We talked about the advancements in medical research. Also, outsourcing and offshoring, meaning that now you can outsource jobs overseas. Think about like call centers and that kind of thing. They don't have to be here in the States. They can be overseas, which has both good and bad sides to that, as well as other types of industries as well that don't need to necessarily be here in the United States. Now, when you look at this and the expansion of popular culture within the United States, you're going to see, of course, the invention of the TV in 1950s and how the TV became the main mode for news, entertainment, and culture. Well, we've seen that big shift now, too, to basically social media and cell phones, that those are the main avenue of getting and sharing information, especially social media now, which seems to be where most people get their news from versus traditional news sources. Also, you'd see changes in music throughout history as well. Hip hop has grown so much in popularity, starting basically in the 1980s through today, that has really, really grown. I encourage you to check out this video here on the evolution of dance. Now, because popular culture has changed, we have mentioned this before, this has led to a conflict between opposing viewpoints, opposing cultural viewpoints. I think if you look at our world today, you can definitely see that. Now, lastly here, what about women in the 20th century? How did things change for them? You're going to see that more occupations open up to women, change their roles, concerns, and influence. You have more women in the labor force just in general, and women doing jobs, again, that aren't considered like a traditional, or aren't considered traditional like female jobs. You have them doing those jobs, and the courts would be important in helping pave way for some of those changes. Also, what are some issues that continue to be in the 20th century and may continue even today? You're going to still see that women's groups continue to push for affordable daycare. Again, as more women work and now need daycare, equitable pay, and against what is known as the glass ceiling. And again, that's the perception that career advancement is not equal for men, and that there is this invisible ceiling that women kind of can't break through during this time. So I know we talked about a lot today, especially here at the end, a lot of what seems like random stuff as we kind of round out the 20th century. We've only got one more class to go of instruction, and with that, we're going to be talking about what the early 21st century looked like here in the United States. So hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great day.